searching for more, while all along you are found with the poor. Help me to see you're all around me. Our praises arise as we come to recognize Jesus is near, your glory is here. Oceans and hills and in ancient skies, hidden in faces and pain and delight, your glory is here, and I get a glimpse of you. In silence and prayer, in bread and wine, somehow the common becomes the divine. You're making me new, I'm starting to see you. Our praises arise as we come to recognize Jesus is near, your glory is here. Our praises arise as we come to recognize Jesus is near, your glory is here. God is my shepherd, I won't be wanting, I won't be wanting. He makes me rest in fields of green, quiet streams. Even though I walk through the valley of death and dying, I will not fear, 'cause you are with me, you're always with me. Your shepherd's staff comforts me. You are my feast in the presence of enemies. Surely goodness will follow me, the house of God forever. Is my shepherd, I won't be wanting, I won't be wanting. He makes me rest in fields of green with quiet streams. Even though I walk is with me. Your shepherd's staff comforts me. You are my feast in the presence of enemies. Surely goodness will follow me, house of God forever.
Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown. Scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth when he blows upon them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these things? He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name, because he is great in strength, mighty in power. Not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even the youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint.
When the lines are drawn, when you're in or out, when it's us or them, and we shame the doubt. It is all a lie. All we ever really need is love. There's no need to shed more blood. Look upon the cross. Look upon the cross. See the face of Christ. See the mercy in his eyes. Every valley shall be lifted high. Now our enemies are blessed, and the heavy laden rest. For his judgment is love. His judgment is love. There is no more guilt. There is no more shame. All our darkest sin, all our deepest pain. Blessed are the poor, all the lonely, broken, lost, and torn. See your kingdom come to us. A war that's fought with love. Our only war is love. Prepare the way of the Lord, wielding mercy like a sword. every mountain top will be made low. And no, he holds the earth like dust, and his judgment comes to us, and his judgment is love. His judgment is love. We will not fight their wars. We will not fall in line. 'Cause if it's us for them, it's us for them, it's us for them. We reject the either or. Can't define us anymore. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them. We will not fight their wars. We will not fall in line. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them. We reject the either or. It can't define us anymore. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them. Bear the way of the Lord, wielding mercy like a sword. Every mountain top will be made low. No, he holds the earth like dust, and his judgment comes to us, and his judgment is love. His judgment is love.
As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered in the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons.
To all her looking down, whose heart's still wounding. For those who yet to find it, the place is near where love is moving. Soft the robes you're wearing, set aside the names that you've been given. May this place of rest in the fold of your journey bide you to home. You will never walk alone in the shelter of each other. We will hearts are turned to stone, there is hope. We know the rocks will cry out. And the tears aren't ours alone. Let them fall into the hands that hold us. Come away from where you're hiding. Set aside the lies that you've been living. May this place of rest in the fold of your journey bide you to hope. And you will never walk alone in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live. If there is any peace, if there is any war, we must all believe that our lives are not our own. We all belong. God has given us each other, and we will never walk alone in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live in the shelter of each other. We will live, we will live.
Good morning. Morning, Jake. A couple of announcements real quick. February 14th. Caleb just said Valentine's Day. Is that what everybody thinks of? Heathens! We're going to have an Ash Wednesday service. So, happy Valentine's Day. Remember, you will die. Ash Wednesday, February 14th, 7 p.m. That's just the day it falls on, folks. So, maybe take your significant other out Tuesday or Thursday or whatever. Britt and I are doing something that weekend. If you want to come to that, that's always a really, I think, special time of reflection, and it's much more intimate. Most years we just circle up some stairs and chools, chairs and stools over in this section, circle up, and we'll do, the donning of ashes and all of that. We're doing it different this year. I'm not going to do it to everyone else. We're going to do it to each other, because in the shelter of each other we will live. Come out to that for that Ash Wednesday reflection. And then the Nehemiah action is when? April 16th. April 16th. So mark your calendars. It's in your bulletins too. I'm going to announce it every Sunday till then. All right. Let's get into these texts, mostly the one from Mark. I like these stories. The younger children, K through 4th, will be dismissed now. Don't shake your head at me. Oh, good. Good luck in there, y'all. Have fun. Learn something. I like this story. I think it can be challenging to us, and hopefully we're gonna play with it a little bit as we do, and see if we can discover something about our own faith journeys. I want to kind of just dive in with this story from Mark chapter 1. It's a really interesting story to have very early on in the book, right? It's Mark chapter 1. This is the book's opening up, and right out of the gate, there's a lot of action. That's how Mark writes in general. It's kind of fast-paced. You know, Matthew and Luke both start their gospel accounts with some kind of background, whether it's historical background like Matthew or family background like Luke. And then they have these genealogies, and they have the birth stories and things like that, right? The book of John begins with like a theological introduction to the life of Jesus, and then also like some stated aims for the book, right? But in Mark, the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest gospel written, we don't have any of that, and Mark's gospel feels, as we read it, the way that the people who were first receiving it probably felt. This is a gospel narrative written to people who are either experiencing at the time or have just experienced the destruction of the temple. People who had seen in Jesus a person that they could call Messiah, anointed one. People who had seen in Jesus a person they felt they could follow towards the institution of a new kind of world. And yet here it is, a kind of centralizing, stabilizing religious symbol has just been destroyed. And that evokes feelings of fear, concern over the experience of being overwhelmed by chaos, right? The success of the injustice of Rome. Rome is simply everything and everywhere and too powerful, and they cannot do anything about it. Rome can do whatever they want, exploit any group of people they desire, march into any town they feel like they need to, and then if that town doesn't like it, destroy the sacred sites and holy symbols of those people. And this is what the first readers of Mark are going through. That's the context into which Mark is writing. And so we don't really see any need for him to prove that Jesus is Messiah, say, as like books that were written 30 years later did. Or to tease out the cultural significance of what that might mean to a particular group, whether that's the Greeks like Luke or the Jewish folks like Matthew. Right? Rather, Mark is answering the question, what does it mean for Jesus to be Messiah in these uncertain, chaotic, and unjust times? Great question. Great question that we could sit with. One that certainly matters for us as well. And so that's how Mark approaches the narrative. There's not really any background, just gets into the action. Hey, there's this prophet, and he's preaching stuff, and then there's this other guy who's now following him, and he's a prophet himself. And he's proclaiming, right, chapter 1, Jesus just starts proclaiming, the kingdom of God is here, gathering disciples. Our text for today is a story that is right at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, where he's going to be out teaching in public and healing and delivering people and all of that. And as you read the beginning of the gospel, there's just like several paragraphs, and each is like 2 sentences each. Things that in the other gospels are these full stories, right? Jesus was baptized by John. Jesus went into the wilderness, was tempted by Satan. Boom, boom, boom. He gets through all that real quick, and then expands a little bit, pumps the brakes just enough to draw our attention to these first couple of healing stories. Our text from today is the second of those healing stories. Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. They have come home from the synagogue, and they see that she is sick with a fever, and then he heals her, releases her from this fever. And she gets up, and she looks at Jesus, and she like pats him on the face and says, "You're too skinny," and starts going to make him some food. And then Jesus and all his friends say, "Eat, boys, eat." But then the word gets out, someone in the household or somebody, a friend of the family or something, and then all of a sudden, a bunch of people are brought to Jesus. Other people who are sick, other people who have had this oppression by these chaotic, demonic forces. And so what does Jesus do? Well, he's a healer, right? And he starts to heal people, casting out demons. That's what he does. He alleviates the suffering of people around him by releasing them from those things that bring them that suffering. And then, of course, this is combined with the proclamation of God's kingdom. That's kind of just the ministry of Jesus, right? In fact, as you heard at the end of the story, he realizes after some prayer and meditating that he needs to go to other towns, not just Galilee. Can't just stay in one town. Now, this ministry of calling out the reality of God's kingdom and calling people into it and then healing and releasing people, That fits really well with Mark's narrative and his point, right? Because what Mark is trying to show is that there are these demonic forces. There are evil forces at work. You just saw them embodied, destroying the temple, killing innocent people. And Mark's point is that Jesus is more powerful than them, which is to say, has more agency than them, agency over them, in fact. That they do not have to control the people, that they do not have to destroy the people. Obviously, a really important question as the people in and around Jerusalem, and then, of course, by extension, all of those who were of the Jewish faith in other regions around the empire were greatly affected by this destruction of the temple. All the biblical writers agree, all the New Testament biblical writers agree, right, that there is this strong embodiment of evil forces in the Roman Empire. Right? You look at the book of Revelation, it's like the most glaring example of this, of course, but Paul talks about it as well, the principalities and the powers, right? So this is like the questions that they're faced with. Do these powers that are so tangible to us, so real, so obviously in control, so mighty and powerful, is there actually a chance of salvation? Is there actually a chance of freedom? Is there actually a chance for release? Or do the powers of evil just win? Because it feels like they're always just winning. And so Mark tells these stories. No, Jesus has authority even over the evil spirits. That's an encouraging thing to hear, of course, but it's also an empowering thing to hear, right? Because we know how this story unfolds. Jesus ends up sending out the disciples to do the same thing as well. They also have the power over the evil spirits. The community, of course, that is hearing this letter from Mark is hearing that they are also sent out to do this same work. And we who are hearing this text are hearing that we are also sent out to do this work, to proclaim the reality of God's kingdom and to release people from the power of evil and evil forces that are embedded in our world and that so often guide it. This is, in fact, one of the really challenging things in this text. The idea of that oppression, this weightiness over people, and all of the surprising places that we find these evil, oppressive spirits. The text before our story today shows Jesus in the synagogue. It's the first time he's going to do something publicly, and he goes into the synagogue and he begins teaching. You may remember a similar story in Luke. He opens up the text about Jubilee, the year of the Lord, where economics will be reset, right? Where the debts will be not forgiven, right? Because that's still on the ledger. They will be like done away with, right? People will be just released from debt. The land will be released from its enslavement, and everyone will rest. And he says, this has been fulfilled in your presence. Right? The deliverer is here, the one who is going to bring this reset, this justice, this sustainable, deep shalom life that we have so often talked about. He says, that's happening now. Well, he's probably saying something similar in Mark, but Mark's very brief, right? He just says he's proclaiming God's kingdom in the synagogue, and then somehow, through all of this, suddenly a man who is possessed by a demon, it says, begins yelling at Jesus, saying, like, what do I have to do with you? Are you here to destroy me? Jesus says, be quiet, get out of here. And the demon does. Now, what's really interesting to me is that that story occurs in the context of a synagogue. And this story with Peter's mother-in-law occurs after they had just left the synagogue. And then, as we hear, Jesus goes into the other towns and teaches in all of the synagogues. I think that's really important. Obviously, there's something just cultural. The synagogue is a teaching place, so that's where Jesus is going to go to teach, right? But I think there's something more here for us. The idea of the centrality of the synagogue in Jesus' attacks on demonic forces. We know one of the main tensions in the book of Mark and all the Gospels is, of course, the idea that certain religious rulers have leaned on their favor with Rome, right, to enact power over the people. King Herod, of course, is installed by the Roman Empire, So the Herodians are very much in collusion with Rome, but the temple system has also allowed itself to be co-opted. They have made agreements where they will pay tribute from the temple taxes to Rome. And hey, maybe Rome, you can do some stuff for us too now and then. Use those fancy swords you have to make sure that I stay the high priest, or that my family is well taken care of, let's say, right? We know there was all of this collusion with the elites as the peasant classes suffered, as Rome extracts everything from the region, sending it to the other elites around the empire. And the people suffer under the pain and ill of occupation, not just economically, but even emotionally, as they lose the agency over their own homes, as they lose the agency of practices for themselves that are right and good. And it is allowed to continue because of leaders who are in collusion with the evil forces of Rome. And so Jesus goes into the synagogue to teach, and is there exposed to someone who is being controlled, consumed, oppressed, driven forward, right, by a spirit of evil. What a place to find that happening. Interestingly, it's the demon who says to Jesus, "What do you have to do with us?" Right? The demon is already there and is confrontational towards Jesus. Why was this man in the synagogue in the first place? Shouldn't a synagogue be the place where demons feel uncomfortable? Right? Shouldn't it be the place where like evil is kind of preached against and they don't want to be there? Is this the first time this man's been uncomfortable? Jesus tells the people around him at the end of his life that the temple of Jerusalem had become a harbor, a safe place, a den of thieves, a place that shelters those who seek to harm other people. And perhaps this synagogue had become that kind of place itself. The reason I think that's important to highlight is because this is the same exact thing we deal with today, except maybe worse, right? Because we stand on a tradition not just of synagogues and temples, right? We stand not only on the shoulders of our Jewish cousins, but we also stand on the tradition of these texts that show us Jesus casting out evil spirits, releasing people from demonic forces. We know all the stories, and yet churches become and are so often harbors and safe havens for those who harm, for those who destroy. Braylon and I went to MegaCon yesterday. It's a big convention for everything nerd culture, basically, right? Anime, comic books, Star Wars, the gaming community, both video games and tabletop games. And we had been planning the leading up, right? We were looking at the schedule, like what events do we want to go to out there? And I let him lead that. I let him pick what he wanted to do. And one of the things he wanted to do is to go hear a live recording of Erie, Florida. It's a paranormal activity podcast. And if you know Braylon, he loves the paranormal. Right, we've been on a ghost tour in St. Augustine. He keeps trying to get us to go to Georgia to see the Bigfoot Museum. Very much about UFOs, right? He loves like all the paranormal stuff. Well, the panelists were taking turns answering the same question, and it was in the like horror room. So the question posed to them was like, "What's the scariest thing you've ever experienced?" Most of them just said, "Well, you know, this is what I do for a living, so it's not scary to me." But some of them had like some answers of like, "Oh, here's a crazy thing I saw or experienced." One woman answered in a really interesting way, and she's also a very interesting person and held kind of a unique posture because she was like very explicitly Christian. And she kept saying things like, you know, "I'm from the South, and we got a lot of Baptist churches, and I'm a Baptist," and all this stuff, right? She was a little older, maybe, I don't know, mid-60s, 70, I don't know, something like that. And she was talking about stories, and particularly this one in this Baptist church she was attending at the time. You know, side note, she's on this panel because she's also always been in tune with like spirits and that kind of thing, right? And she said she felt this evil presence there, and other people felt it too, and they would hear this baby crying, and even though there was no baby here, right, things like that. And then one day she saw this terrifying vision of this like evil creature, and she just knew this creature was like a creature of like death and destruction, things like that, right? And she was using the language of demonic entity. And she kind of goes on and tells that story and then tells about some other experience she's had in churches. And she says something really interesting. She says, there's actually often a lot of this kind of activity in churches. And I had already been sitting with these texts for the week, and that kind of just like spilled out and started mixing in with what she was saying, and I'm thinking about what that phrase that she said. And the previous people on the panel had all kind of talked about this idea that, ghosts and paranormal, that realm, like there's this idea that it's not so much like Casper the Friendly Ghost floating around like a single entity you could like see or something, but rather events will occur in a space and they leave like an imprint. Like they leave a memory, something like that, right? And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about what she said. Of course, she thought about it like this. Where else are they going to attack? Of course, they're going to attack churches. But I thought maybe there's so much activity in churches because maybe there's so many bad imprints. I mean, I'll bet there is a lot of activity. I bet there's a lot of imprints that have occurred in institutions who, in claiming to follow the God of love and the God of justice, the one who releases people from demonic activity, have fought for white supremacy. I bet there are a lot of imprints. I bet there is a lot of activity at these places, as the churches who are supposed to be a welcoming embrace have been gatekeepers, determining who and who cannot minister to others based on gender or sexuality. I'll bet there are a lot of imprints left behind. When children are abused and it's covered up and swept under the rug. I've watched enough ghost movies to know you can't sweep those things under the rug, can you? They always come back out. I bet there is a lot of activity in places where kids are sent away afraid and lie on their beds at night and plead with God that their family members don't go to hell. Now, maybe you don't believe in spirits, and that's fine. I know that's hard for modern people. You probably think that is woo-woo, perhaps. But I think it's still challenging for us, nevertheless, right, to think about this question for our own communities. Are we harboring the forces of destruction, of exploitation, of consumption? Are we harboring those things? Are we allowing those seeds to grow in our own community? Followers of Jesus are meant to be agents of healing and release for people so that they are not bound by those kinds of things, so that they are free to be the people that can go and release others from the bondage that has been placed over them. And unfortunately, so much of that bondage has been placed by a religiosity that either cares for its own existence as such or one that is in collusion with empire. In the story of Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law, we see something very interesting. It says she suffered from a fever. And I had a hunch. I was like, all right, these are pre-modern folks. They still believe in spirits and all that. So I looked up the word fever. I didn't find anything. My hunch was still there, wasn't confirmed yet. So then I compared Matthew and Luke's account of the same story. They both tell it. And Luke had it. Luke made my hunch confirmed. When you think about a fever, you probably just think your head is hot, your body is hot, you're sweaty, right? There's some kind of like medical thing at play here, right? Of course, that's what we think of. But when we see Luke tell this story, he says that as Jesus goes up to Peter's mother-in-law, he rebukes the fever. Right? Luke personifies the fever. And I think that's probably at play for Mark as well, because this story fits in the context of this demonic activity that Jesus is attacking, right? There's this idea that this is something that is oppressing this woman. Maybe it's something unnatural. It's not like the flu. It's like something that's like tearing her down. It's debilitating her. It's keeping her from the things she wants to do, like cook for Jesus and his friends. So he rebukes the fever. And I think that highlights for us something important. The world in which we live makes us sick. Have you seen the numbers of like the unknown as far as it can't be explained medically? Autoimmune disorders? They're on the rise. People are getting sick, and there's not really any physical explanation for it. Because the way we have chosen to live together is making us sick. Our bodies are like, we don't want to live like this. We need connection. We need love. We don't need exploitation. We don't need counting ourselves as just a cog in a wheel that makes someone else's wealth grow. The way we have chosen to live is making us sick. We can't take it. Our bodies need to get out from under the burden of the things that are demanded of us. See, Jesus walks into the world. Jesus walks through the earth, and he says, "This is my Father's world." Did you know Jesus wrote that song? Jesus walks through the world, and he sees the world of Isaiah, like we heard read today from chapter 40. The Lord stretches out the skies like a tent. Where did all this come from? It flows out from God, Isaiah says. It's filled because God gets really creative and is just throwing paint everywhere and getting crazy with his ideas. The God of the Hebrew Bible, the God of Jesus, is the God who is entwined with the natural order, who, Isaiah says, makes his dwelling in the earth. Sure, there's a temple. Isaiah knows about the temple. But he says, really, the whole earth is the temple. Everything is God's to dwell in. I heard someone recently, I read an article where it was by a theologian. Ryan sent it to me. And she talks about the earth as the body of God, right? The physical, like, manifestation of creative love. And Jesus walks around, that's what he sees. But when we walk around, we see that there are these cancerous growths. There are these things that Jesus has to say, that's got to go. This world is too good for these things to be here. We've got to get these demonic forces out of here. Ultimately, right, Jesus would say this, although he didn't believe in doing it like through some kind of military action. We got to get Rome out of here. We got to get them out of here. That's the world Jesus promised when you look at those prophecies at the end of his life. That's the world that Jesus' followers promised as we look at the epistles. That's the world the book of Revelation tells us is on its way. Hey, Rome's on its way out, baby. What does it mean that this earth is God's home? Isaiah tells us what it means. He brings the rulers to nothing. It's a strong nothing in Isaiah, right? For us, nothing is like empty set or something like that. But when Isaiah used the word nothing, it's the same Hebrew word as the earth was formless and void, right? He uncreates the powers. He uncreates the rulers. The powers, the rulers that we tend to think bring us order and structure and center our world, especially in a time where there's kings, but we do the same thing, right? God says, no, that's not what brings order. In fact, they are chaos, and I will return them to chaos. So that means that we do the same thing, right? We follow Jesus. He says, follow me. Which means first, we put ourselves in proximity to those who suffer. Right? That's the basic thing. He was in the house with Peter's mother-in-law. He hung around the people who came to him who were sick and suffering. Listening, right? Every word that is spoken by the suffering is an opportunity for us to engage, to listen with open ears, to watch for those times where there is that explosive moment in the synagogue. And we bring healing. That's going to look a lot different, right? Different ways that we can do that. Maybe you are the kind of person that could literally just heal someone, that can bring them relief through your very presence, like Jesus. Maybe your very presence lifts people up. And so you just have to be around them. But maybe healing sometimes looks like supportive things we do for each other, right? As our bodies begin to realize that they can have rhythms of love and joy and peace and hope rather than rhythms of despair and dread and angst. And being together through those journeys. Maybe it's telling the forces to be quiet. as those who proclaim structures of expansive growth and unsustainable realities, maybe we say, be quiet, stop talking to the evil powers. Maybe it's proclaiming, preaching, explaining to people that there's a better kingdom than the one around them, that we don't have to give our emotional investment to the systems of the world, but we can spend our emotional investment building something good together right now, something better. We want to see something that doesn't exist yet, but with the eyes of faith, we know that it's on its way. And so we can be the healers. I love what happens in the story, right? After she is healed, it leads to hospitality. Healing leads to greater connection among people as she begins to prepare food and make her space a new space of healing. Right? She is released from this fever, and then more people are brought into her home that need the same thing. I mean, that's kind of like the model of what this space should be, right? Where we grow together and find healing together, and then more people can be brought in and experience the same kind of thing. Healing brings hospitality, and healing leads to more healing. As people find release and rest, they are able to bring others release and rest. So this is our call today, to watch that we are not harboring forces that seek to undo others, to work with God against the powers who are actively against the support of the people around us, and to live in the faith, which is to say the expectant confidence of the reality of God's kingdom. May we do this in the shelter of each other. Let's pray. Excuse me. God, we ask that